Alright, we are going strong with day number 3 of the Blast Fall group stage. We are moving on to the other half of the bracket. We are seeing the remaining teams get their first chance to compete, including some highly anticipated debuts of new rosters coming out of the player break. We get to see Cloud9 for the first time totally reformulated with a complete new core under Bubblesj, as well as test the waters with Twist taking his first foray into being an in-game leader with the new look Team Liquid. And with heavy-hitting teams like Faze, Navi, G2, and Pro also getting their first chance at competition, there was no shortage of interesting games today. So with that being said, let's keep things brief, utilitarian, to the point, and let's go ahead and crack straight into the recap. Right after you remember to take a second, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps out immensely, so make sure you do it. While you're down there, consider becoming a channel member for $5 a month. You can support me directly in what we do here, gain access to regular videos the night before anyone else, and a shout out at the end of every video. And lastly, check me out on Twitch, link down below. That's it, straight to the point. Let's get started. And we are getting things started with Faze taking on Cloud9. Cloud9 being one of the more interesting teams coming out of the player break, as I already alluded to. This is a completely new roster built from the ground up, with Bubblesj and Exile being the only remaining pieces from the previous one. And with the additions of Heavy God, Icy, and Interns, I think this is actually a really solid roster. I rate Bubblesj pretty highly as an in-game leader. He's not the best tactical mind for the game, but I think he's really good at setting up his players. And I think Exile has a lot of potential to bounce back and show some great potential star form. I think Heavy God's a great person to put right behind him as a main rifler, and Icy has shown a lot of potential on the op. The question is, would he translate to the tier 1 level? And Faze, they're the perfect opponent to really cut your teeth against, because if you can beat or hang with Faze, that means you can hang in the top 10 easily. For Faze, I think people were pretty concerned about them as we entered the player break, as they started to really slip in their results towards the end. They go up to the EWC, they go out 5th to 8th, they look okay but have another rocky start. And then we pull up here to the Blast Fall groups, and I really think people want to see Faze have a strong start to kind of assuage some fears here. But, as we'll get into, it wasn't exactly the easiest win for Faze. This ended up being a 3-map set. Faze do win it in the end, but Cloud9 gave them a real run for their money. Not only were Faze's wins on Dust 2 and Mirage pretty close affairs, Cloud9 soundly beat them on Inferno, which is really interesting because when you dive into the stats, previous to this, Faze were 10-1 on Inferno over the last 6 months. So while Faze do the work in the end, they get the win, which is great. I'm a little bit concerned that they seem to have a consistent track record now of starting tournaments slow. They're making things more difficult than they have to be, and they have to kind of build up into the Faze playoff form that we know, and that's concerning because they might be exiting tournaments early because of it. Okay, so we start off on Dust 2, right? And one thing I want to point out right away is this interesting change in the Dust 2 meta. Obviously now we have that new catwalk box. A lot of people were anticipating a huge swing in the favor of the CTs on this map. Dust 2 a traditionally T-sided map. It's been T-sided for a very long time, and very rarely have we seen CT dominated metas, but here we are. So far at the Blast Fall, there's been 7 Dust 2 maps played in total, and right now, CTs are currently winning 60% of the rounds played on the map. Ts are all the way down to just a little bit below 40% win rate, which is a crazy swing. And it all has to do with the fact that CTs have so much more ability to contest map control. And when we look at this game, we see a bit of an extreme example of that. This was a CT dominated game. Faze, they open up on the CT side, they go 10-2. We swap sides. Cloud9 win 8 of the first 9 rounds themselves. The difference in the end and why Faze ended up winning is because they went on their run first, so they only had to win a handful of rounds to close out the game. The point being that the CTs were so dominant that Cloud9 nearly had a reverse sweep going. And quite honestly, they might have had it if it hadn't been for the fact that we got the titular Rain game. Rain went thermonuclear with 27 kills, a 1.83 rating. He was disgusting on the CT side, just absolutely everywhere. I swear, when Rain pops off, he looks like one of the best players I've ever seen. If you just watched Rain highlights, you would think he's one of the top riflers to ever play the game. He's like the J.R. Smith of Counter-Strike. Right behind him on the first half, Brokey had a great performance with the op in his hand, ended up with 14 kills. He ended the game with 17 kills, so he definitely had a drop off in the second half, but he was great to open the game, and that needs to be highlighted. For Cloud9, I think what went right here was their CT side looked really solid. They were great at winning post-plant situations. In 6 rounds on the second half, Faze would take a site and plant the bomb. In 5 of those cases, Cloud9 would successfully retake the site and win the round, which is an incredible conversion rate against a team like Faze. And Icy, Heavy God, Exile all had moments where they had incredible impact. Icy led the way with 23 kills, had great moments with the op in his hands, and like I said, Cloud9 nearly won this game. They kept it close. Faze was able to close out in the end 13-10, and we're moving on to Inferno. And like I already said, Cloud9 took a very comfortable win here, 13-7. They managed to hold off the Faze attack perfectly. Faze normally a very good attacking team on Inferno, especially when they take B control, but Cloud9 did very well to hold them off. Axile, Heavy God, Icy once again leading the way as the trio. Icy getting good op impact. Heavy God was incredible on the T side, specifically great clutches late in the game. Axile dominated the CT half with 16 kills. Really great stuff from him. In terms of the CT side defense, they did well to not fall too much into the bait of letting Rops control the apps. They gave him apps a lot of the times, but they minimized his impact from there. They played really passive on A, and a lot of the time that forced Faze into situations where they were wasting a lot of the clock into late pushes, and that was allowing Cloud9 to sneak out round wins that maybe they wouldn't have gotten otherwise if they were too aggressive. On their T side, it was actually just clean, efficient bomb side takes that won the day for Cloud9. Heavy God was definitely a difference maker. He had the most kills on their T side. He had an incredible 4K clutch late in the game that kept their momentum. And all that came together for Cloud9 to get the map win and force us to a decider. We're pulling up on Mirage, and here we have an overtime banger to close out the series. And Cloud9, they could have won this. This was a very close game. In the end, if I had to give Faze an edge here, I think it comes down to experience and like poise. Faze have been in these close matches so many times as this unit. They're very comfortable playing around each other. So out of both of these teams, they have the intangibles to hold it out in these late game situations. Cloud9 had two great opportunities to finish the game. They couldn't do it. It goes to overtime. Faze are just the better team in overtime. When you look at the scores for the entire game, this game is as close as it could have been in terms of output from both teams. Both Frozen and Axile are going band for who's the best player on Mirage here. Right behind them, you have Icy with 28 kills, also looking great on the ops, still a monster for the entire series. Rops, once again, in great form. Brokey also doing it for Faze. It was one of those games where it felt like everybody, even the in-game leaders, had their moments to shine. This was a complete game, and definitely one to go back and watch yourself if you have the time. Faze move on to the upper bracket. Cloud9, they drop down to the lower bracket final, and honestly, I do not envy the team that has to play Cloud9 in that lower bracket final tomorrow, because Cloud9, they look really good. This was a great debut for this roster. I can't emphasize that enough. Moving on to our next series, we have G2 taking on NIP. G2, of course, coming off of a second place finish at the EWC, and so far, pretty much surprising all of us with how well the snacks experiment has started. And here, this feels pretty much like a layup to start their tournament. NIP have some interesting aspects, but overall, this is definitely not a roster I would expect to have an upset, especially against a team like G2, and that's what we saw play out. It's a 2-0 series. For the most part, not a whole lot of interesting Counter-Strike was played. We start off on Anubis, it's 13-7. The Muncie show continues from where it left off. Snacks was putting in some valuable work on the T side. Nico was off doing Nico things, just clicking heads and yelling at everyone, "Shut up!" The big thing that stands out to me for this game and for this series is that I didn't really see Malbs do kind of anything. Malbs had okay numbers, but I felt like I never really saw any impact from him. There were no big plays, no clutches, nothing that really stood out. He was just kind of playing the spots he was asked to, not being a liability, but also not doing anything remarkable. And considering Malbs, I think, was tabbed to really be an impact player for this team, I am worried that the prophecy is coming true and he's just stuck in the bitch roles and we're not going to see anything from him. But I will add the caveat, his numbers at the EWC looked a lot better, so it could just be a slow start for him. I hope to see Malbs stand out a bit more going forward, but here, he was just kind of a non-factor. They really didn't need him either. The only NIP player who really showed up, especially in this first game, was Alex. And even then, NIP couldn't stop the T-side attack from G2. They win an 8-4 half. We switch sides. The G2 defense is too good. The NIP playbook is not deep enough. It's over, 13-7, and we move on to Inferno. And G2, one of the best Inferno teams in the world for my money, so I expected this to be a blowout. But fair play to NIP, they make it closer than I thought it would be. It's a 13-11 affair, but that comes with the caveat that NIP could not stop the T-side once again from G2. G2, one of the best Inferno T-sides in the world, obviously. They're really good at exploiting banana control and being super aggressive and in your face. They own banana on both sides, frankly. And I was expecting G2 to close out this game cleaner than they did, but they allowed the door to stay open. NIP, they fought back on their own T side, took 7 rounds, brought it back, and made G2 sweat a little bit. But just a little bit, right? Because you have a Hunter pop-off game, which G2 rarely gets. Muncie, still the best player in the server, best player in the world. Shocking. So even though NIP looked better, If m0NESY and Nico are popping off, that's already hard to deal with. When you add in Hunter or Malbs getting impact, that's going to be too much even for some of the best teams in the world. So NIP, they take a quick L, they're dropping down to the lower bracket, G2 gets started off with a dub. Hopefully they can maintain that because I want this team to work. I want m0NESY to get trophies while he's playing this good. Speaking of trophies, we're moving on to our next matchup. We have the recent trophy winners Navi taking on Big. Navi, of course, coming off of a tournament win at the EWC and recently being crowned HLTV #1 in the world. They're on a really good run of form, especially if you consider their last tournaments before the player break as well. And listen, I know we didn't cover the EWC on the channel for many reasons, but you know, if I just pretend I'm an esports organization and set my morality to the side for a second, there's no denying that Navi are on a good run of form. We come here into this tournament and their first matchup is pretty much a free layup because Big, while they may be interesting in the context of a top 20, top 30 team, they're not good enough to beat Navi. This series was a blowout. It was a quick 2-0. I went and took a nap during this because as soon as I saw how the first map went, I knew the second map wasn't really going to matter. It's a quick 13-7 on Dust 2. It's an even quicker 13-3 on Mirage. Navi move on easily to the upper bracket final, and Big, they just got to get ready to avoid elimination tomorrow. It just is what it is. With that, we close the day with Team Liquid taking on Virtus.pro, by far my most anticipated match of the day because I was really curious if this new look Liquid was going to be a disaster or not, and Virtus.pro in their own right have a lot to prove. Both of these teams really wanted to start off this tournament strong with a win, build some confidence, and make sure they have a buffer zone to not immediately be on the outside looking in. Unfortunately, only one team could prevail, and Team Liquid takes this series 2-0, and it really is a tale of two maps because the first game on Ancient is by far the best game played so far at the tournament. If you take nothing away from this video, go watch this match on Ancient. It was an awesome triple overtime thriller. It had everything: clutches, throwing, insane performances, comebacks, and heartbreaks. And we got to see a little bit of everything, good and bad, from both of these rosters. It is very all-encompassing for where these teams are at right now and was an immensely entertaining match to watch. Now, really, there are too many interesting rounds for me to go into. I could do an entire video on just this game, and I might once this tournament is wrapped up, but we're going to keep it general. Let's just talk about how these teams looked in a broader sense. Starting off with Liquid. Twist, so far, to start out here, still had incredible impact as the best player on this team. He still seems to me to be the star player. He's just also calling the strats. And in terms of what they brought out strategically, I thought their T-side on Ancient actually looked pretty good. But that comes with the caveat that Ancient is a relatively simple map. You can work around defaults pretty much every single round and just play around what happens. You don't have to have a super deep strat book. And for Liquid, I don't want them to have a super deep strat book. I want them to work around defaults, play around the fact that Twist and Naf are very smart players, work the mid round, work the intel, and then take sites late. I think that's the ideal Liquid formula, and that's kind of what they did here. They were pretty aggressive when they needed to be, and crucially, they took full advantage of Yakindar having a great start to the game. Yakindar definitely had a nice bounce back here compared to what we saw the last time they played before the player break. He looks more engaged, more locked in, and him and Twist working kind of the two-man game with the rifles looked really good. JKS, his first tournament game since IEM Sydney, he also looked great on both sides, had amazing impact late on the CT side as well. Nafly got his. The only thing that didn't look good to start this game was Ultimate. Ultimate had a very, very slow start to this game, but he more than made up for it by having an electric, dominant performance in all three of the overtimes. He entered overtime with only 11 kills. He finished the game with 32. He tripled his output in the overtime and was so crucial for Liquid getting this game over the line. And you have to consider, Ultimate had such a task in this series. His first tier 1 game on LAN was against Jame. For all of the shit that I have talked about VP over my time covering tournaments, one thing I will always maintain: VP is a gatekeeper team. If you are not good enough to be a top 10 team, you will not beat Virtus.pro unless they fuck up. Jame is exactly the same. If you're a good enough opper to be in the top 10 to hang with the big dogs, then you can beat Jame. Jame will shut you down with his consistency if you're not good enough. And Ultimate, to start off the game, he would look like he was not up to the task. But man, something locked in, and he looked so legit to close this game in overtime. Huge multi-kills. The op looked incredible in his hands. Super aggressive on the CT side, boosting up into heaven, pushing to caves, getting those aggressive picks. He looked good with the rifle. This was what I saw when we did the original breakdown about this news. His mechanics look incredibly good, incredibly solid. The big question mark for Ultimate was, would it translate? Would he need time to adjust to this level? And to start off, that definitely looked like the case. But if Ultimate can do what he did in the overtime more, this guy has potential, man. It may just be one map, and granted the second game he kind of went missing, but the eye test, Ultimate has some potential, man. I was really happy with how he performed. For VP, it's really hard to say what went wrong here. These triple overtimes, you could say that the game really could have went either way, but in terms of like what looked good for VP, all of James, Norbert, and Electronic were incredible. James had great impact throughout the game. He looked engaged. I thought they did really well to have timely, aggressive plays on the T side. They weren't overly passive. I still think their CT side is very suspect. I don't know how that will change over time. The thing that definitely stuck out to me was Fame and Flit didn't have a good match here. You can write that off to a one-off, as Flit and Fame had a better performance on the second map, but you got everything else you could have asked for. Liquid just outplayed you down the stretch, which is just going to happen sometimes. For Dust 2, it's a much different game. Instead of this hyper-competitive, down-the-wire performance, Virtus.pro unfortunately disappeared. They went on a streak of 4 rounds after winning back the second round after the pistol loss, but then they failed to win no more than 2 more rounds for the rest of the game. Liquid went on a huge run to close out the CT half, where they didn't allow any room for Virtus.pro to work. They shut down Long, they shut down Cat, they shut down B, and then we swapped sides, and there was just nothing that Virtus.pro could do to stop the attack from Liquid. And you gotta look at the individuals here. For Virtus.pro, everyone who showed up on the first map went missing. Norbert and Electronic were straight out to lunch, complete non-factors, and while James, Flit, and Fame tried their best, with no Electronic on the T side especially, their T side just had no teeth. We swap over, they couldn't stop the momentum from Liquid. Twist had an incredible map, picked up the op and looked good with it as well. Naf was doing Naf things, just so consistent. JKS held it down around the margins. Yakindar continued to look good on the entry, got his kills when he needed it. Ultimate wasn't really needed. He only got 10 kills, 12 deaths, but frankly, they were just getting rounds done without him being necessary. So I can't even really write him off too much. Overall, a surprisingly good start for the Liquid Twist experiment. Will Ultimate maintain this form? I'm really curious. Virtus.pro, they dropped down to the lower bracket, so they're facing elimination tomorrow, but I'm just going to say, I know I'm never going to bet on VP again, but they're good enough to beat the other teams in this group. If Virtus.pro gets eliminated tomorrow, I'm going to be furious, so we'll see how that plays out. And with that, another day is in the books for the Blast Fall group stage. Tomorrow, 2 more teams will be sent home. In our first elimination match, we have Cloud9 taking on NIP. In our second one, we have Big taking on VP. In the upper finals, we have Navi taking on Liquid and Faze taking on G2. Those are some stacked matchups in the upper finals to look out for. I'm really curious to see how this plays out, and I'm sure you are as well, so make sure you're here tomorrow for the next recap. Let me know your thoughts on the new Cloud9, the new Liquid in the comments down below. I'll be responding as always. Make sure you like and subscribe while you're there. All of my videos are powered by Advanced.gg. They are my go-to source for caffeine to get my work done every day. But they are more than just a supplement company, so make sure you take a look at the link down below, browse their products, and if you make a purchase, you can use my code LIONS10 for 10% off at checkout, and it lets Advanced.gg know that I sent you their way. Thank you to Advanced.gg as always, and thank you to my channel members, Justin, Jesse, Furley, Bubblesj, and Dr. Cocktor for keeping the lights on. If you want to become a channel member, check the link in the description down below. Right next to it will be a link to my Twitch channel. Check me out on Twitch. I'll be streaming tonight, 8:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Come hang out, say hi, tell me I'm bad at Counter-Strike, whatever helps you feel better. It's okay, I understand. And with that, I'll see you guys soon for another video. Peace.